Imagine you and I walk into a vast library that claims to contain everything that can be said about reality. Not novels, not history books, something stranger shelves of sentences. Each sentence is written in a language with a brutal rule. You are not allowed to start by assuming space, time, particles, forces, or any familiar furniture. You are only allowed one primitive token, the holophase, phi, a rule that assigns to every event a place on a circle. Not a place on a line, a circle, a position on a turning dial. From that single primitive, we learned how to speak carefully. We learned how to lift the circular phase to a local number only on patches where that is legal. How to take the first derivative word a, meaning the local change of that lifted phase. And how every time we talk about change, we must remember the triunity. Three inseparable echoes of the same change word. The cadence echo, the texture echo, and the transport echo. We learned that closure creates integers, that loops carry memory, that obstructions are not objects we add, but failures of smooth speech that we must excise and then track with topological tokens like winding and holonomy and charge. We learned that with many obstructions, linking is real and diagram tricks are not. We learned that even inside the clean domain, there are degeneracies, places where certain readouts collapse, and that these are not errors in nature, but typed regimes. And we learned the discipline of guards. If an operation is not defined everywhere, then operator plus guard plus domain is one honest unit of meaning. No silent divisions, no secret normalizations, no pretending. Now we come to something that sounds like it belongs in a mathematician's notebook, but is actually a survival skill for any language that wants to stay truthful. An invariant basis, a minimal generator set. The idea that a language becomes powerful not by speaking more, but by compressing what it already knows until redundancy disappears. You're learning to read as a child. At the beginning, every word looks like a separate creature. Tree, street, tree. Everything is new. Everything is fragile. Then someone teaches you the alphabet. 26 letters. Suddenly, the chaos collapses into a small set of pieces. You can build thousands of words from a few shapes. You did not add new reality. You discovered the generators, the basis. Or think of music. At first, it sounds like endless novelty. Then you learn that, for a particular musical system, a small set of notes and intervals generates the songs. Or think of weaving, since weaving is a deep metaphor for our whole program. At first, you see a carpet as infinite detail. Then you learn that a small set of knot moves, repeated under strict rules, generates the entire pattern. Again, no new threads, just compression of description. An invariant basis in holophase is the same kind of compression, but with our strict Piaget discipline. We are not allowed to invent new primitives to make the compression easy. We can only use what the language already earned. Phi on the circle, local lifts were legal, the change word A as the derivative of that local lift, finite jets when we need local Taylor-like structure, excise domains where speech is valid, and topological tokens for global memory. So what is the problem we are solving? After parts 1 through 27 of this language reveal, you might feel a danger. We have too many ways to say the same thing. We can talk about local change using different patch choices. We can talk about the same structure using different chart descriptions. We can talk about loops with different representative curves that lie in the same homotopy class. We can slice the domain differently and still be describing the same semantic content. If we don't compress, we will drown in equivalent descriptions and start mistaking new notation for new structure. And that is how fake universes are born. An invariant basis is our antidote. It is a chosen small set of invariant descriptors, built from jets and topology and guarded domains, such that any admissible statement you can make in this language reduces to a function of that set. Meaning, if you can say it at all, you can say it using the basis without adding ontology. Notice what that does. It does not impoverish reality. It strengthens discipline. It says, if you claim to have discovered a new observable, a new meaningful quantity, the first question is not, is it exciting? The first question is, can it be rewritten as a function of the existing invariants? If yes, you did not discover new structure. You discovered a new name for old structure. Still useful, sometimes, but not ontically new. And if it cannot be rewritten, then we have a precise fork. Either the basis is incomplete for this domain, or your claim is not admissible in PS0 at all, or you have smuggled in forbidden primitives. Think of a city map. There are many ways to describe where you are. I'm near the coffee shop. I'm 2 streets past the bridge. I'm at latitude this, longitude that. I'm 5 minutes from the station. Different descriptions, same place. If your goal is to build a navigation system, you do not want to store 10,000 poetic descriptions. You want a coordinate basis that is stable under equivalent descriptions. A pair of numbers in some chosen coordinate system that can generate every other description. That pair is not the territory. It is a minimal generator for descriptions within a chosen map model. In holophase, we want the same thing, but our place is not a point in space. It is a local and global pattern of phi change. Locally, that is the jet content of the lifted phase where lifting is legal. Globally, that is topology, loop memory, winding, holonomy, charges, linking classes. And always, domains and guards. So when we say invariant basis, we mean a set of invariant quantities built out of those tokens, with declared domains, such that any other invariant you care to speak about can be reduced to a function of them. Now comes the first firewall gate, but I will not present it as a checklist. I'll present it as an instinct we train. Well-formedness gate in living language. If you propose a basis element, it must be a sentence we are allowed to say. That means it must be reducible to PS0 tokens. It must be typed. It must declare its domain. It must respect lift ambiguity, gate shift, char change, and the excised sets. If your basis element depends on an absolute phase value, it is not a basis element. It is noise. If your basis element depends on where you placed a branch cut, it is not a basis element. It is bookkeeping residue. If it depends on a particular diagram of a link rather than its isotopy class, it is not a basis element. It is a drawing artifact. Invariance gate, again as instinct. If we switch descriptions in ways we are allowed to switch, change local lift by an integer multiple of a full turn, change charts, deform loops within their allowed class, choose a different representative in the same equivalence class, the basis element must not change. If it changes, it is not semantic. It is not a stable letter in the alphabet. It is handwriting style. Domain gate as honesty. Every basis element lives somewhere. Sometimes it lives on the clean domain where the first derivative word exists. Sometimes it excludes degeneracy sets where a normalization would become undefined. Sometimes it lives only on patches of a certain smoothness class. If you do not declare where it lives, you have not defined it. And if you pretend it lives everywhere, you have created a fake universe. Non-encodability challenge as the final discipline. If someone insists this new thing cannot be expressed using your basis, we do not panic and add a new primitive. We demand proof. Show that it cannot be rewritten in PS0 tokens and cannot be generated as a function of any reasonable extension of the basis inside the existing ontology. Very often, the truth will be simpler. The new thing is either illegal, or it is reducible, or it is a basis incompleteness that requires adding a new invariant generator. Still inside the same language tokens, not a new kind of substance. Now let's bring triunity into this, because bases can secretly break triunity if we are careless. Triunity is not decoration. It is the structural law that the cadence, texture, and transport readouts are inseparable echoes of the same change word A, which is the derivative of the lifted phase. This means an invariant basis must not privilege one projection as the true one, unless that preference itself is stated as a typed, guarded construction that can be rewritten back into A and domain structure. Think of three shadows cast by one object under three lamps. If you define your basis using only the shadow on the left wall, you might still describe many things, but you will build a biased language. You will accidentally treat left wall shadow as fundamental, and then you will be forced to invent extra rules to patch your blind spots. A good basis sits above the shadows. It is built from invariance of the object itself, so that any shadow can be recovered without privileging it. In holophase terms, if your basis is cadence only, you will start smuggling in a timeline you were not allowed to assume. If your basis is texture only, you will start smuggling in a pre-given space grid you were not allowed to assume. If your basis is transport only, you will start smuggling in motion as an independent primitive. The only honest way is to define basis elements in a neutral way. Invariants built from A and jets and topology and domains, such that the three readouts are derived echoes, not rulers that dominate the grammar. Now, how do we make this feel real across scales? Let's start with everyday life. You have a friend who seems complicated. Some days they are warm, some days they are distant, some days they are energetic, some days they disappear. If you try to track every surface behavior, you drown. But if you learn to track a small set of invariant drivers, say sleep debt, stress load, and social safety, suddenly 1,000 behaviors reduce to combinations of a few generators. The friend did not become less complex. You became more literate. You found a basis that compresses behavior without lying. Or consider conflict in a family. People argue about the dishes, about money, about who called whom, about what was said 5 years ago. The surface topics are endless. But very often the conflict reduces to a small set of invariants: unmet needs, boundary violations, and trust erosion. Once you see those, you can generate the rest. Again, the point is not to shrink life into a formula. The point is to stop mistaking redundancy for essence. Now zoom to history and behavior on the civilizational scale. A nation collapses, and commentators produce thousands of stories. Some blame one leader, some blame one policy, some blame culture, some blame foreign forces. The narratives multiply. But serious historical analysis often compresses complex events into a smaller generating set. Resource flows, legitimacy structures, institutional brittleness, and communication coherence. Different historians pick different coordinates, but the underlying move is the same. Find a basis that generates many surface narratives, then argue about which basis is adequate for the domain. That is exactly the same logic as our invariant basis discipline. And notice the firewall. A good basis must be invariant under redescription. If your explanation changes completely when you translate it into another equivalent framing, it was never semantic. It was propaganda disguised as analysis. Now biology. A cell is an ocean of molecules. If you try to describe every collision, you die of detail. Biology survives by choosing invariant bases: regulatory motifs, feedback loops, conserved quantities, and topological constraints like linking in DNA. In fact, DNA gives us one of the clearest examples of why basis is not optional. The double helix has a linking number, an integer measure of how the strands are linked, that cannot change unless enzymes cut and rejoin. That integer is a topological invariant, and it functions like a basis element for many macroscopic behaviors: supercoiling, gene accessibility, stress response. The cell does not track every atom. It tracks invariants that generate consequences. That is not mysticism. That is compression under constraints. And this connects directly back to our language. Topological invariants in holophase are basis candidates because they are stable under deformations that do not cross excised sets. Winding numbers, holonomy classes, defect charges, linking classes, these are exactly the kind of letters that remain meaningful even when local derivatives fail or when the domain has holes. They are global grammar tokens. Now zoom to the smallest and largest scales as metaphors without leaving P as zero. At very small scales, and I will say this carefully, we are not importing quantum mechanics here. That is later. But we can still use a metaphor. Sometimes, a complex pattern is fully determined by a small set of global constraints plus a small set of local expansion coefficients. A finite jet at a point is like the first few terms of a story's opening paragraph. It does not tell you the whole novel, but it generates local predictions about what the next sentence must look like if the writing is smooth. If you collect enough such local generators across a domain and add the topological constraints that stitch them together, you have a grammar that can generate an enormous range of admissible sentences without adding new primitives. At cosmic scales, again as metaphor, when you navigate by stars, you do not need to track every photon in the sky. You choose a small set of guiding invariants, a few bright stars, a compass direction, a horizon rule. That basis lets you orient across enormous distances. The universe did not become simple. Your language of navigation became efficient. So how does this look formally inside our strict language? It looks like this, spoken in audio form rather than written as symbols. We choose a set of invariant generators, each one built from the allowed ingredients. Finite jets of the lifted phase were legal, and topological tokens were global memories present, with explicit domain declarations and guards. Then we impose the requirement. Any admissible observable sentence you can form in PS0 on the same domain and with the same typing must be expressible as some function of those generators. Different functions, same generator set. That is what basis means. Now, there is a subtlety. There is rarely a single unique basis. There are many bases, like there are many coordinate systems in a city. But here, the invariance gate becomes sharp. If two bases claim to describe the same semantic content, there must be a reversible translation between them inside the allowed language. If you cannot translate, then either one basis is incomplete, or they do not actually describe the same domain. Think of temperature scales. Celsius and Fahrenheit are different bases for the same thermal ordering. There is a reversible conversion. You can go back and forth without losing information. That is what we require for basis changes. Same content, different coordinates. In holophase, we demand the same. If someone says, my basis is built from these jet invariants, and another says, my basis is built from those jet invariants, and they claim to describe the same domain, then there must exist a lawful rewrite that takes one generator set to the other and back, at least on that domain with its guards. If not, one of them has silently smuggled in extra structure or silently thrown away structure. Now let's install the formal prediction and the formal falsifier in the way episode 13b requires. Grammatical prediction, grammatical falsification. The prediction is not an experiment claim, it is a language claim. Prediction. Once you enforce invariance and domain hygiene, many new observables collapse into functions of a small generator set. In other words, a lot of apparent novelty is redundancy. The language will compress. You can feel this in daily life. A person tracks 10 different productivity hacks and believes they discovered 10 independent levers. Then they notice most of them are functions of two generators: sleep quality and distraction control. The rest were wrappers. The story compressed. You can feel it in history. A society argues about countless surface reforms, and then a crisis reveals that most outcomes were functions of a few invariants: trust in institutions, distribution of resources, and coherence of communication. Everything else was decoration. The story compressed. You can feel it in biology. A lab measures dozens of biomarkers and then finds that many are redundant functions of a few core regulators. The story compressed. In holophase language, the same will happen. Many quantities you can define from jets and topology will turn out to be functions of fewer invariants once you remove dependence on chart choices, lift shifts, cut placement, and unguarded operations. Now the falsifier. Falsifier. Produce an admissible observable. Admissible meaning PS0 legal, invariant under allowed equivalences, and domain declared with proper guards. That cannot be rewritten as a function of the proposed generator set. If you can do that, you have not broken the world. You have proven basis incompleteness. And basis incompleteness is not a crisis. It is a precise instruction. Extend the basis. Notice how clean this is. We do not say, oh no, we need a new substance. We do not say, oh no, reality is mysterious. We say, the chosen alphabet was missing a letter for this domain. Add a new invariant generator, still build from the same tokens, and then test again. That is the non-encodability discipline in its most constructive form. We do not inflate ontology. We refine the generating set. Now, let's confront the temptation to treat the basis as what reality is. This is where we must stay humble. The basis is not the world. It is a minimal generator for sentences about the world within a declared domain and grammar. It is a compression of description, not a metaphysical claim that nothing else exists. In holophase, we are extremely strict about what we call ontic. Phi is the only primitive. Everything else is derivative language. A basis is part of derivative language. It is a choice of generating invariants. It is not a new thing in the universe. It is a disciplined way of speaking that prevents us from mistaking verbosity for insight. Now I want to make the idea stick with one more analogy that ties together the whole arc from defects, linking, degeneracy, and guards into the need for bases. Imagine you are responsible for keeping the accounts of a large city. Not money accounts, but the city's structural accounts. You must keep track of what stays the same, even as things change. You cannot track every citizen's step. You need invariants. How many people are inside the city walls? How much water enters? How much food leaves? What roads remain connected? Which bridges are intact? Those invariants form a basis for the city's stable description. If a bridge collapses, some invariants change discontinuously. That is like a defect crossing a boundary. If two neighborhoods become linked by a new tunnel, the connectivity class changes. That is like linking structure. If a main square becomes a flat gathering point where no direction is preferred, some flow descriptions become undefined and you need a different grammar. That is degeneracy. And if you try to compute traffic per road capacity without checking that road capacity is non-zero, you produce nonsense. That is failure of guards. So a basis is what makes the bookkeeping possible. It is what lets you say in one breath what matters, What is invariant, what generates the rest, what must be declared, and what cannot be spoken without cheating. Now let's seal the four gates more explicitly, but still as story. Well-formedness gate. When we choose basis elements, we choose only those that can be built from the allowed ingredients. That means no metric, no pre-given geometry, no imported fields. Only local jets of the lifted phase were legal, and global topological tokens were closure forces integers. Each basis element must be typed. If it requires a certain smoothness order, say so. If it requires excluding degeneracies, say so. If it requires a clean domain that avoids excised obstructions, say so. Invariance gate. A basis element must not change when we do allowable redescriptions. Shift the lift by full turns. It must not change. Change charts. It must not change. Move branch cuts. It must not change. Deform loops within the allowed domain without crossing defects. It must not change. If it changes, it belongs to the category of representation, not meaning. Domain gate. The basis is never for everything. It is always for a declared domain. Even in ordinary mathematics, a basis for one region may fail in another. The same is true here. If a basis element involves a ratio, it must declare its non-zero guard. If it involves a normalization, it must declare where normalization is legal. If it depends on the existence of derivatives, it must declare where derivatives exist. Otherwise, the basis is not a basis. It is a set of promises that will break at the first edge case. Non-encodability challenge. If a proposed basis seems incomplete, we do not add new primitives. We demand a proof that the missing observable cannot be expressed as a function of existing generators and cannot be repaired by extending the generator set inside the existing ontology. Only if that proof succeeds do we even consider that the language itself might be missing something. And in episode 13b, we are not adding anything. We are freezing PS0. Now, because this is audio, let me say the central carry sentence in a way you can remember. A good basis is a small set of invariant letters, such that every legal sentence in the domain can be spelled using those letters and nothing else. Think of the last time you felt overwhelmed by life. Too many tasks, too many worries, too many moving parts. Then you sat down and did something simple. You identified 2 or 3 generators. 1. Health. 2. Relationships. 3. Work. Or 1. Energy. 2. Attention. 3. Commitments. Suddenly the chaos became navigable. Not because life became small, but because you discovered the basis that generated the rest. You learned to ask, is this problem really new, or is it a function of low energy and too many commitments? That question is basis discipline. It is compression. It is literacy. Holophase asks us to do that, but at the foundation of public language about reality. It asks us to stop worshipping complexity. It asks us to discover the minimal invariant generators inside the strict alphabet of phi, its lawful derivatives on typed domains, and the topological grammar of loops and obstructions. And here is the bridge forward. Once we choose an invariant basis, a new question becomes unavoidable. How do we certify that our chosen basis is genuinely complete for the domain? How do we know we have not missed a generator? What does it mean, formally, to say, this basis spans all admissible observables in PS0? That is the next tightening of the seal. Because at the end of this episode, we want a language that cannot be cheated. If something is publicly distinguishable, it must be expressible as a function of our invariants, or it must force a precise extension. No mystery slogans. No silent imports. Always. Peace be upon you.